that's part of Vietnam's education reform in the bigger picture, where Vietnam wants to improve in terms of HDI, in terms of Human Development Index, as well as in terms of Education Index. And SB is also part of Vietnam's education reform in order to improve its English proficiency scores in terms of IELTS, TOEFL, as well as EF-EPI. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the issues and challenges confronting the implementation of SB policy in Vietnam. What are they? The first one that I would like to discuss is the fact that there are varying views about English. So even though in general English is considered very strong, English is considered very prestigious, English is considered very high in comparison to other languages in Vietnam. In some contexts, this is not the case because there are some parents, according to my respondents, who think that English is just like other subjects. In other words, they may consider English with a high status. They see English with a high status, but they do not see the subject, English as a subject, with a high status. And this is a common issue because for that reason, then they don't really push their children to attain high proficiency in the English language. The second common issue has to do with the assessment policy. So the Vietnamese government has introduced a new assessment policy called the CEFR, right? The Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, in which case then teachers in Vietnam are required to attain C1 in the CEFR level, and then they are also required to assess students using the CEFR descriptors. Another form of assessment that has been introduced by the Vietnamese government is portfolio, where students' learning progress can be seen over time, where students' progress is assessed or evaluated within a certain period of time, rather than just one time when they are doing a test. So this is a very significant improvement, a very interesting idea that has been introduced in Vietnamese education sector. However, apparently more traditional approaches are still widespread. In other words, teachers are still more interested in implementing traditional approaches to assessment. What are these traditional approaches to assessment? These are tests that are based on grammar and accuracy, tests that focus on grammar and accuracy, on reading comprehension, tests that do not really assess or evaluate learners' communicative skills or communicative ability. So this has been ongoing, and this has been witnessed in several different areas, in many different areas in Vietnam. And then in terms of pedagogical logistics, there are also many issues that Vietnam is currently facing. The first one is that there is success in terms of the decreasing ratio of teacher and students in the Vietnamese classroom. In other words, now teachers in Vietnam no longer have too many students. They have from small size to middle size classroom in most cases. However, they are still confronted with the fact that there is very limited exposure to the English language. As I showed you earlier, the exposure to the English language is limited to 3 times a week for 45 minutes, each of them, for each lesson, for students in lower secondary and high schools. So that is a big problem because in order to be able to use the language perfectly for communication, you need a lot of exposure. However, that is a problem that's happening not only in Vietnam, but also in other foreign language contexts. And the main reason for that is because of the use of English as a subject rather than as a medium of instruction. So in a way, even though, yes, it is limited, but it is politically necessary to only provide students with a few hours of instruction, because other hours of instructions will have to be devoted to other subjects, in which case Vietnam may need them the most. And then the other thing is that there has been an increased emphasis on digital learning. So Vietnam has tried to achieve the status of an industrialist nation. However, there's still low connectivity in terms of internet. So in many areas in Vietnam, teachers are unable to offer online instruction, for example, during the pandemic because of this reason. In addition to that, there is a proposal to accept digital learning and assessment. At this stage, there are some scholars within the main circle of the Ministry of Education in Vietnam who have proposed the idea of accepting digital learning and assessment. However, this idea has not materialized, and I still don't know whether the Ministry of Education is going to accept this idea. If this idea or this proposal has been accepted, then it's going to be much easier for the Vietnamese teachers to assess their students. However, the logistics of this proposal will still need to be considered. A major issue relates to the curricular misalignment in Vietnam. What I meant by curricular misalignment is that there is no parallelism, there is no connection between the curriculum in primary and secondary education. The fact is that the curricular contents are not well integrated in primary and secondary education. In other words, what is taught in primary education has no relationship with what is taught in secondary education. Students can go to secondary education without knowing without knowing anything in primary education. It seems that whatever it is that's taught in secondary education is totally disconnected from primary education. So for that reason, transition is problematic. When students move from one grade to another, there needs to be a good transition that enables them to continue education in terms of content, in terms of frequency of instruction, in terms of areas to learn, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and so on. However, according to the data that I have gathered, apparently there is no such connection. So for that reason, then the curricular contents are not well integrated. And the long-term consequence of this issue is that students have varying levels of English proficiency prior to entering secondary schools. This results in the idea of segregation of learners, where you have a group of learners who are very good at writing and reading, and other groups of learners who are very good at grammar and vocabulary, but they are not very good at writing. And then you also have other groups of learners who are good at speaking, but they are not very good at writing and reading. So learners in Vietnam are very much segregated because of that reason. And this has created problems to teachers because teachers find it really difficult in order to be able to teach their students properly because of the grouping of these segregated learners, which has happened in many different classrooms in Vietnamese regions. And then the next part has to do with issues with teachers. So according to the, yes? According to the policy of the government, most teachers are required to reach the level of C. Yes?
Excuse me, Mr. This is the end of the presentation. We would like to share our big thanks to our great presentation. Now we are happy to receive.
I thought this is going to be 50 minutes.
Yes, but we have 10 minutes for Q&A. Now it's time for Q&A.
Yeah, 50 minutes. So that means another 20 minutes, right?
Yeah. You want to talk in 2 minutes, or you want to have Q&A?
I would like to continue if possible because I haven't finished.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. All right, I'll try to be brief. So most teachers, even though the policy has stipulated the idea of having C1 level in the CFR, most teachers cannot meet this level of proficiency. And another problem is that CFR is deemed insufficient, which means that even though it is required for teachers to be able to reach that level of proficiency, in fact, CFR only measures one's proficiency to use the language for general purposes. And this has nothing to do with the ability and skills to use the language to teach. So that is a major issue. And then in terms of teacher education, data shows that teaching practicum is insufficient. Many practical components are needed, and for that reason, then teaching practicum has to be improved and has to be lengthened. And the idea of digital technologies are expected to help with creating training metrics of 3, 4, 5. And by 3, 4, 5 here means in the beginning, teachers could attend face-to-face instruction for 3 days, 4 days of online education where they can study independently, and then 5 days of implementation where they can study face-to-face with their teacher educators. So this is a brilliant idea that has been implemented in some universities in Vietnam, and I suggest that this idea to be implemented in other teacher training organizations in the country as well as in the ASEAN region in general. And then in terms of English for ASEAN integration and English variety, SB is desirable for ASEAN integration, and for that reason, ASEAN cultures will need to be incorporated into teaching materials, and learners will need to be introduced to different Englishes. In terms of multilingualism, there is a need to tackle language endangerment because at least 47 languages in Vietnam are endangered, right? So are in problematic situation. 41 of them are endangered and 6 of them are dying out of the total 109 languages in Vietnam. So for this reason, if the Vietnamese government would like to improve education, it cannot just promote English, it cannot just promote Vietnamese. It also needs to tackle language endangerment issue by ensuring the use of multilingual education. So what needs to be done? Recommendations for research and policy that I would like to suggest. The first one is research into multilingual education. The basic idea here is that how can English and other foreign languages be accommodated in the curriculum, and when should Vietnamese work alongside the mother tongue? In other words, alongside the indigenous languages. And then there needs to be an evaluation of the CFR, how and to what extent the CFR has been useful and what can be done to improve and how it might impact communication with other ASEAN fellow members. There is a need to improve teachers' proficiency. So for that reason, the Vietnamese government needs to develop strategies to improve teachers' English language proficiency and English for teaching so that teachers can reach the desirable level of intelligibility. And teacher education also needs to pay specific attention to teachers' English for teaching. In other words, the kind of English that is necessary, that is instrumental, that is very important to enable them to teach English successfully. And then there is a need to strengthen the practical orientation of teacher education. So there are courses that are practical, such as lesson planning, curriculum, classroom management, curriculum design, new approaches to assessment, literacy, materials development, child psychology, global Englishes, and so on. These are all important and they require greater coherence in the pre-service curriculum. And then the training matrix is important, 534 or 537 or 234. As many matrices can be developed as long as the teachers of Vietnam can learn English face-to-face and can learn digital skills accordingly. So they can develop their English language proficiency as well as digital competence, and this can go hand in hand with pedagogical competence. So the use of training metrics is very important in this regard. And then there is also a need to integrate curriculum and materials in a systematic policy. So for that reason, then we need to ensure that there's a good transition from primary and to secondary education, so that aspects such as contents, language for socialization, macro skills and micro skills are all integrated well. And then there are also components that relate to ASEAN related topics, so that learners in Vietnam can learn about, students in Vietnam can learn about their neighbors. They can learn about Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. They can learn about children in the Philippines, in Brunei, and in Indonesia. And then the last bit would be focus on literacy in SP curriculum. It is recommended that Vietnam design the SP curriculum in such a way where literacy becomes its focus. And if Vietnam does that, then the curriculum needs to place a heavy emphasis on literacy. This is important so that it can prepare learners in Vietnam for PISA. And hopefully in the long term, it can increase national competitiveness in the country in terms of Human Development Index and Education Index. That is all for my presentation, and this is a list of references. They come from these two books of mine. So if you are interested, I will be happy to share the link with the conference organizer, and you'd be able to download the book with them. Okay. Thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to receiving your questions if you have any.
We would like to share our big thanks to your great presentation. Now we're happy to receive any questions you might have for our presenter. Any questions?
In the meantime, I think you can stop sharing screen and then back to the main board.
Okay. This is my first time using this software, so I'm still learning how to do it, so please bear with me.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering if
is it enough now? Is it better now? Hello?
Yeah, much better.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm trying to put in the class notes in here. Can you see my class notes? No? Okay, I'm sending this as a chat. Can you see the chat? I have already sent a link to my books. So can you see the link?
Yes, we can see it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So if you click on the link, then you will be directed to the page from the British Council where you can download the two books. Okay. All right. So any questions that you may have, feel free to ask, and then I'd be happy to respond to them. Yes, that's the one. That's the page.
Okay, you can start, please. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'll certainly be downloading and reading your publication later. I work in the private sector, English language education, yes. But yes. Within state schools in Vietnam,
okay.
Especially in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, and some larger cities. There are a lot of private English language centers that are allowed to work within state schools in Vietnam to supplement the ESBE curriculum. And I just wondered if your research touched on that at all, the role of the private sector in state school English education in Vietnam?